The room was thick with silence, broken only by the faint echoes of footsteps on marble floors. In the center, a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed yet shackled in cold steel handcuffs, stared down at a small child standing before him. His eyes were a mixture of regret and disbelief, as if the weight of an empire crumbled beneath his very gaze. Behind him, towering glass walls framed the sprawling cityscape under a gray overcast sky. Somewhere in the distance, a camera flash cracked. His face plastered across the cover of Time magazine, bold letters screaming the fall of a titan. A disembodied voice pierced through the heavy air, calm yet haunting. He built an empire, but he couldn't save her. No names. No explanation. Just the raw, aching paradox of power lost and a future uncertain. No names had been spoken yet, but the magnitude of loss was unmistakable. The child's eyes held a depth beyond her years, reflecting a quiet sorrow that whispered of broken promises and futures lost. The man's empire, once a beacon of success and ambition, now lay in ruins, a kingdom conquered by fate rather than rivals. The weight of solitude pressed in on him, a glass tower prison where every reflection mirrored a dream shattered. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and unaware of the fall from grace unfolding within. It was here, in this fragile moment of vulnerability, that the story truly began, at the crossroads between what was lost and what might still be salvaged. Behind the headlines and handcuffs, a life story flickered, one of ambition marred by loss, of dreams deferred and love strained. The man's mind raced through memories of laughter and conflict, victories and sacrifices. He had built something extraordinary, but the cost had been personal and profound. Now, stripped of power and surrounded by silence, the truth weighed heavier than any headline. The child, a living reminder of hope and unfinished stories, stood as both judge and reason to rise again. This moment was not an end, but a painful prologue to a journey neither of them could yet understand. Outside the tower, the city pulsed with indifferent life. Neon signs flickered, cars honked, and people bustled, unaware of the shattered legacy inside. Yet somewhere beneath the cold glass and steel, hope flickered, a fragile ember refusing to die. The man's fall was public, but his fight would now be private, waged in the silence between heartbreak and resolve. The child, once a symbol of innocence lost, would soon become the catalyst for redemption. In the quiet aftermath of collapse, the first seeds of a new story quietly took root. As darkness settled, the man's sobs faded into a steely silence. Time had not paused for him. The world moved relentlessly onward. Yet in the stillness of that glass tower, something shifted. A flicker of resolve hidden deep within his shattered soul. The child, standing silently, was not just a witness but a reminder. Even in ruin, the possibility of rebuilding remained. This was the stark, raw beginning of a story about loss, power, and the fragile, fierce hope that binds them both. The girl stood at the edge of a worn playground, her small fingers clutching a teddy bear threadbare from years of comfort. Around her, other children's laughter rang out like distant music she no longer felt part of. Her gaze was distant, eyes dark pools reflecting a pain far older than her 9 years. She had watched her father, once a towering figure of success and power, unravel beneath the crushing weight of failure and public disgrace. In her heart, a silent promise grew, a fierce determination never to be trapped by the same mistakes, never to live under the shadow of shame. The warmth of the late afternoon sun did little to pierce the cold resolve in her gaze. This child carried within her the seeds of a future forged not in privilege, but in resilience born of loss. Years later, a young woman stood in a sleek, high-rise boardroom, her back rigid and turned away from the polished table where others whispered and watched. At 28, she carried the weight of expectations and the sting of rejection with equal measure. Her name was spoken quietly in corporate circles, never loud enough to break the glass ceiling she sought to shatter. Though her resume glittered with achievement, the invisible barrier of doubt followed her footsteps. In that moment, facing a sea of indifferent faces, the ache of being overlooked was raw and palpable. Yet beneath the cold veneer of disappointment, a fierce flame burned. She wasn't here to fade quietly. She was here to fight, to claim what was hers by right and relentless will. In a cramped, dimly lit corner store far from corporate towers and playgrounds, a small boy sat silently on a worn wooden stool, clutching a bright red toy car like a talisman. His eyes darted nervously around the space, as his mother, exhausted and worn by years of struggle, pleaded softly with the store owner behind the counter for any kind of work. The weight of poverty pressed down on them like a relentless storm, shaping every breath and dream. Yet within that cramped space, the boy's gaze held a spark, a quiet defiance against the circumstances thrust upon him. He was not defined by his surroundings, but by an unspoken vow. One day, he would rewrite his story and escape the shadow of hardship. Even in darkness, hope flickered. In these disparate moments, the story's emotional core crystallized. The child who vowed never to repeat her father's mistakes, the woman fighting invisibility in a world ruled by power, and the boy clinging to hope in poverty, each bore invisible scars. Shame, love, fear, and relentless fire intertwined in their hearts, shaping their resolve. These were not tales of triumph without struggle, but of battles waged beneath the surface, unacknowledged by the world at large. The audience was invited to witness these wounds, to feel the weight of pain and the strength born from it. The emotional anchor of the story took hold, weaving a tapestry of resilience that connected these souls destined to rise against their pasts. As dusk deepened into night, the city's relentless pulse cast long shadows on streets and hearts alike. These separate lives, once fractured by circumstance, now carried within them the faintest embers of something greater. The child who witnessed failure, the woman who faced rejection, and the boy burdened by survival were bound by more than pain. Their wounds were the foundation of an unyielding power, a fire kindled through struggle and sacrifice. Each looked ahead into uncertain futures, where resilience would be tested and transformed. The emotional anchor firmly set, their stories promised a journey of fierce determination, heartbreaking sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption still burning bright in the darkness. The journey had begun, and with it, the relentless grind of ambition took hold. Sleepless nights became the norm as ideas churned incessantly in the young woman's mind. She paced her small apartment, surrounded by scattered documents, half-empty coffee cups, and a whiteboard cluttered with sketches and strategies. Every moment was a battle against doubt and exhaustion. Friends faded from her life, their invitations unanswered, their calls unanswered. Lovers slipped away, replaced by the cold comfort of deadlines and cold office air. Yet despite the toll, a fire burned brighter within her. This was her chance to build something real, to prove that she was more than a footnote. The cost was high, but the price of giving up was far higher. With the dawn, she moved into the world of boardrooms and pitches, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. She faced skeptical investors, each question a test of her resolve. Lost birthdays became blurred memories. Invitations to family dinners were replaced by late-night emails and urgent phone calls. She sacrificed laughter for late nights and companionship for cold coffee. Every win felt hollow, each small success shadowed by the constant pressure of what lay ahead. The business grew, but so did the weight on her shoulders. Friends she once cherished faded like echoes, and lovers became ghosts in the story she barely had time to write. The ascent was brutal, but surrender was not an option. In the quiet of a late-night office, the cost of ambition became painfully clear. A missed birthday notification flickered on her phone, ignored in favor of drafting emails and preparing slides. The glow of the city skyline framed her silhouette against the window, a lone figure sacrificed to the altar of success. Friends' texts went unanswered, their voices replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the click of a keyboard. The victories, though hard-fought, were bittersweet, a reminder of what was lost along the way. Each achievement came at the expense of relationships and moments that could never be reclaimed. Yet beneath the fatigue and sacrifice, a stubborn spark of hope refused to die. The wins came, but they never felt like victories. Each deal closed was met with a hollow sense of accomplishment, Each milestone passed felt like a step farther from the people who once mattered. The sacrifices piled up, birthdays missed, friendships strained, lovers abandoned at the altar of ambition. The young woman grew powerful, but at a price. The isolation deepened, shadows creeping into the corners of her life where laughter once lived. The dream she chased was real, but the cost was steep. In those moments, the question loomed: was the price of success worth the sacrifice of everything else? The climb was far from over, but every step felt heavier than the last. The journey toward power was a lonely path littered with quiet sacrifices. Friends she once trusted drifted away, their voices replaced by silence. Lovers she hoped would stand by her left when the nights grew too long and the stakes too high. Yet with every loss, she steeled herself, fueled by a vision bigger than herself. The empire she began to build was not just about success, it was about rewriting the story, breaking the cycle, and proving to herself and the world that she could rise. Exhausted but unyielding, she stood at the precipice of something monumental. Her ascent was painful, but her resolve unbreakable. The foundation of the empire suddenly felt less solid than it seemed. Behind closed doors, the truth shattered illusions. The business wasn't truly hers to command. A whispered confession, a hidden ledger, a partner whose loyalty had never been genuine. The co-founder, the trusted ally, was revealed as her sibling, a shadow she never anticipated, who had been quietly steering the course behind the scenes. Betrayal cut deeper than any competitor's blow. The narrative twisted, forcing her to confront a reality where trust was fractured, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. The climb was steeper than ever, but now the fight was not only for success but for survival and truth. The walls seemed to close in as the betrayal echoed louder. The mentor she had once idolized, who taught her the ropes and fueled her ambition, was unmasked as a thief, stealing ideas, siphoning funds, and eroding the foundation she had fought so hard to build. The shock was numbing, the pain visceral. Trust had been the currency of her rise, now worthless. Alone in the aftermath, she grappled with disbelief, anger, and a haunting question: how much of her empire was truly hers? The ground had shifted beneath her feet, and the fight had grown darker. The rules had changed, and survival demanded a new kind of cunning. As the betrayals mounted, a darker truth emerged: she was dying. A diagnosis kept hidden from her team, a secret that gnawed at her resolve. Each day became a tightrope walk between maintaining the illusion of strength and wrestling with the fragile reality of mortality. The boardroom battles paled in comparison to the war inside her body. She chose silence, not weakness, determined to shield those who depended on her from the pain. Yet, in the quiet moments alone, fear whispered of endings she wasn't ready to face. The story shifted again. This was no longer just a fight for power, but a desperate race against time itself. The ground fell away beneath the empire she built. Board members whispered of loss, confidence wavering like flickering flames in a storm. The public facade cracked, investors hesitated. And yet, in these moments of collapse, raw truth bled through the cracks. The young woman stood at the epicenter of ruin, stripped of illusions, facing the abyss. But it was here, in this crucible of devastation, that she found an unexpected clarity, a fierce determination that even if the empire fell, her spirit would endure. The collapse was not the end, but the brutal unveiling of what was real and what was worth fighting for. In the hollow aftermath, the young woman embraced a new truth. Legacy was never about titles or fortune, but sacrifice and survival. She began to rebuild, not the empire she dreamed of, but a foundation forged from pain and unyielding will. The relationships fractured by ambition began to mend, and quiet hope flickered through the wreckage. Though weakened, she stood taller than ever before, no longer defined by betrayal or illness, but by the courage to rise when all seemed lost. The reveal had shattered her world, but it also set her on a path toward redemption, one carved from the ashes of collapse and the fierce heart of a fighter. The boardroom was electric with tension, every breath held tight as the young woman stood poised at the center of a storm. Around the long polished table, Seasoned investors and executives exchanged guarded glances, each aware that this vote could either cement her legacy or shatter it completely. The weight of decades of family history, sacrifice, and ambition pressed down like a physical force. With calm authority, she addressed the room. This legacy isn't just about balance sheets or quarterly profits. It's about the lives touched by this company. The families, the employees, the communities. We have a responsibility far greater than money. Her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. The boardroom, filled with whispers and doubts moments ago, fell into a heavy silence. This was more than a vote. It was a reckoning. An apology hung in the thick air, delicate yet charged with raw honesty. The young woman lowered her gaze briefly before meeting the eyes of those she had pushed away. Friends lost to ambition's cruelty, family fractured by silence and secrets. I was wrong, she admitted, voice trembling yet resolute. I let the empire consume me. I forgot that power is meaningless without connection, without forgiveness. The words rippled through the room, softening hardened expressions. Walls built by years of pride and pain began to crumble, making space for understanding. This was not a surrender, but a brave step toward healing. Forgiveness remained fragile, but the first fragile tendrils of reconciliation took root in that moment, promising that fractured bonds might one day be mended. Her final speech was more than a corporate address. It was a heartfelt declaration born from struggle and sacrifice. Standing before an auditorium packed with employees, executives, and stakeholders, she spoke with a passion honed in fire and loss. This empire is not just built on deals or profit margins, she said, voice steady and powerful. It is built on the dreams and sacrifices of those who came before us and those who will come after. We stand at a crossroads, faced with the choice to rebuild stronger, kinder, together. Her words ignited something deep in the crowd, a stirring of hope, of renewed faith in a shared future. The division that had fractured the room began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. This fragile moment was the fulcrum on which the future balanced, her voice the catalyst for change. Away from the public eye, in a quiet office heavy with memories, father and daughter found a moment of fragile peace. Their embrace was silent but spoke volumes. Years of pain, regret, and love folded into one quiet connection. Neither needed words. The weight of shared history and unspoken forgiveness hung in the air. The father's eyes closed, his face etched with sorrow and relief, while the daughter's tense shoulders softened ever so slightly. In that embrace was a promise, not that everything was fixed, but that no matter the outcome of the empire, they would face it together. This was the true legacy, forged in vulnerability and unbreakable bonds, far beyond the reach of titles or fortune. The final vote was cast, and the room held its breath as the gavel struck, a heartbeat echoing through the chamber. The decision was irreversible. The legacy either fractured forever or reborn from ashes. Eyes locked in anticipation, breaths held taut. As murmurs swelled into applause, relief washed over the young woman's face, an exhausting mix of joy, exhaustion, and fierce determination. The empire would stand but transformed, tempered by sacrifice and renewed by hope. Outside, the city lights blinked awake, like stars bearing witness to a story rewritten. Her journey was far from over, but at this moment, everything had changed. The empire was hers, not because it was flawless or invincible, but because she chose to rise again no matter the cost. The aftermath was quiet, yet profound. The empire she had fought to save now stood on steadier ground, but the cost was etched deep into her soul. Titles and profits mattered less now. What remained was the raw human story behind the power. She was a woman transformed, not by success alone, but by sacrifice and endurance. Though she had missed moments she could never reclaim, she had salvaged something greater, a legacy not just built on ambition, but on resilience and love. In the solitude of her office she stared out over the city, knowing the true victory was in what she had become, not what she had achieved. Her daughter, once a distant figure shaped by absence and pain, now walked her own path, one marked not by power or empire, but by discovery and peace. She had chosen to step away from the shadows of legacy, seeking to find herself beyond the confines of family expectation. Their conversations were sparse but meaningful, layered with unspoken understanding and tentative hope. The daughter's journey was not a continuation of old battles, but a gentle unfolding, a search for identity and purpose untouched by the weight of history. In their shared silence lay a fragile but growing bond, promising new beginnings born of acceptance and forgiveness. The company, once rocked by scandal and uncertainty, found new footing in a vision forged from hardship and honesty. The boardroom was no longer a place of cold calculation, but of collaborative strength. New leaders emerged, guided by lessons of sacrifice and resilience. Growth was measured not just in profits but in community, impact and trust regained. Though the scars of the past lingered, they served as reminders of the price of power and the value of integrity. The empire was changing, evolving into something more human, reflective of the journeys that had shaped it. The legacy she left behind was no longer defined by ruthless ambition or fractured relationships, but by sacrifice and survival. She had given up more than titles or money. She had relinquished control to preserve what truly mattered. The company was no longer just a monument to genius, but a testament to endurance and love. In quiet moments, she found peace knowing her journey had inspired others to rise beyond their wounds. Her story echoed quietly in the halls, a reminder that true legacy is built not on perfection, but on the courage to face loss and choose hope. As night deepened outside the city skyline, a quiet moment unfolded. A child's small hand reached up to touch the edge of a boardroom chair, the same chair once occupied by the woman. It was a symbol of passing time, of cycles continuing. The future was uncertain, yet hopeful. The empire remained, but so did the possibility of change. She had left the company but never truly left her spirit, her strength, and the legacy born from both love and loss. This was not an end but a beginning, a quiet promise whispered across generations, carried in small hands ready to shape the future. In the silence of a dimly lit room, the woman faced her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes, weary but unyielding, searched for the fragments of the person she once was, and the woman she had become. Fireworks erupted quietly outside, a distant celebration unfolding unnoticed. The mirror revealed a story of resilience, lines etched by sacrifice, eyes tempered by sorrow and hope. She whispered to herself, not in defeat, but in quiet strength, "I left the company, but I never left her." In that moment, past and future collided, an unspoken promise that though the empire had shifted, the heart behind it remained unbroken. A child's small hand reached tentatively toward the polished boardroom chair, the same seat once held by the woman who had shaped an empire. The room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of morning light filtering through tall windows. Time moved in cycles, and this moment was a bridge between what had been and what was yet to come. The child's fingers brushed the leather armrest with curiosity and innocence, a silent promise of possibility. It was a symbol that legacy was not frozen in history, but alive, waiting for new hands to mold its future. In that quiet gesture lay the heartbeat of a story still unfolding. Outside, the city breathed with endless life, streets humming with movement, lights flickering like stars come to earth. The empire stood tall, not as a monument to power, but as a living, breathing entity shaped by human stories of loss, love, and resilience. The woman's journey, once marked by tragedy and sacrifice, had become a beacon for those who dared to rise from the ashes. Her story was now woven into the city's fabric, a reminder that even when everything seems lost, there's always a way forward. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape, with courage as their guide. In the quiet moments before dawn, the woman sat alone on a rooftop, overlooking the sleeping city. Her silhouette framed by the soft glow of distant lights, she breathed deeply, embracing the stillness. The battles won and lost echoed softly in her mind, but they no longer weighed her down. Instead, they had forged a new strength, one born of acceptance and grace. She smiled faintly, knowing that though the path ahead was unknown, she was ready. The legacy she had carried was no longer a chain, but a foundation, a promise that no matter what, she would keep moving forward. The story closed on a silent note, the quiet strength of survival and love lingering in the air. The woman's journey, marked by loss, betrayal, and redemption, had reached a poignant pause, not an end. Her spirit remained unbroken, the legacy alive and breathing in new hands, new hearts. As the first light of morning spilled into the city, the promise of tomorrow shimmered with possibility. This was a tale of endurance, of the fragile yet fierce hope that binds generations. And though the empire had changed, the story, like life itself, was forever unfolding.